Thanks everyone for being here. It's so great to see everyone, and I'm excited about this topic. If you've been alive for a little while on the earth, everyone has experienced failure in some way, shape, or form. And we're lucky enough to have Jane Machin with us today, Professor Jane Machin, who's going to walk us through that. First, I want to introduce everyone. We are the admissions team for Willamette University's MBA programs. So we have Tony Casenario, who is a director of admissions. He's in Salem. We have Nate Nachi. He is also in Salem, handling MBA admissions, assistant director of recruitment. Along with Dylan. Dylan does early career change, different MBA programs. And then my name's Heather Freeman, and I'm in our Portland Center, our EcoTrust building, and I handle the MBAP program as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I want to give you a little bit of background on Professor Jane. She is an assistant professor of marketing at Willamette. She earned her doctorate in marketing at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, and a Master of Fine Arts in Design Thinking at Radford University. She previously, before her academic career, worked in brand management for a huge player, Unilever PLC. And she's an energetic educator teaching design thinking and advertising creativity and innovation in the undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral levels. She is a recipient of numerous awards for both research and teaching, and we are so thrilled to have her here at Willamette. So I could go on and on about her credentials, but we're going to let her take off and talk about failing greatly. So,
all right.
Jane, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to talk to prospective MBA students for Willamette University. This workshop, I call it a workshop, we're only going to have an hour-long webinar, but it's based on an 8-hour-long workshop that I have taught to numerous institutions, including the CIA, for 3 years prior to moving to Oregon. And so you should have been emailed some handouts. So when this is run as a workshop, we go through the different elements of how to get better at failing. And then we pause in the workshop and complete the exercises. Today, obviously, in just an hour, we won't have time to be actually working through the exercises in person. But I will note as we come to each section sort of what the corresponding exercise is. And then if you're interested, you can complete that work on your own time. All of it is with the goal of helping you to become more comfortable with failing and recognizing the importance of it for success in business or whatever you're doing in life. The brief introduction, I don't need to say much because Heather introduced me, but my background is in brand management. I worked in the UK and in the US for Unilever PLC. After I got my Ph.D. at Wharton, my most recent position is here at Willamette, where I'm teaching the professional MBAs and the early career change MBA students. One thing that Heather did not tell you is that I have a British accent, so apologies up front if you don't understand something that I'm saying. I've lived in America 20 years, so I think I know most American terms for things these days, but some things do still catch me up. And then one other thing to say about me that is very important for this particular webinar is I am very good at failing. One of the things I'm going to be encouraging to do is to actually practice failing. So before we get going, I just want you to take a moment and think about what is the first emotion you think of when you hear the word failure. We had a few results. People popped into a poll and dropped some results up. And people put some things into the chat as well. We've got things like fear, discomfort, inadequate, feeling afraid, feeling panic. Richard is going to be the one that I'm calling on because he wrote opportunity. And I'm hoping by the end of this hour, you'll all start to feel a little bit more like failure is an opportunity rather than something to be feared or dreaded. Let's just close this. And he's the person to be reaching out to if you want to improve your failure skills. The workshop that I teach, I use an acronym, failure. And so I'm going to today, just in this hour, just briefly touch on each of these letters. We'll think about F, which is fearing failure. Then we'll think about how to go around admitting failure, because we all experience failure. Admitting it is hard to do, but it's the first step to actually getting better at failing. We'll then think about different types of failure, because not all failure is created equal. We'll then learn about how to get better at failing, and I'm going to be encouraging you to actively practice failing. And we'll round out with a discussion of how to try and prevent failure from the get-go. That's understanding failure, how to reframe failure so it's not as threatening. And at the end, just thinking about how can you build a culture in your work environment, in your personal environment, where you actually embrace failure. So that's the rough agenda. And like I said, there's exercises in the packet that was sent out that correspond to each of these letters. And I'll just highlight those as we go through. And if you're interested, it's something you can pick up on in your own time. All right, so fearing failure. This is, there are actually a couple of words for it, but the fact that there's a noun to describe this suggests the prevalence of it. Cacorophiaphobia. I used to fear saying cacorophiaphobia, but I've said it so many times now, I don't. Cacorophiaphobia is the fear of failing. They've actually, it's a noun meaning the fear of failure. And it's actually the biggest barrier to creative problem solving. Creativity is needed in every single area of life. And so when I teach this material in an MBA class, I'm actually teaching it as part of a creativity class, a part of a creative problem solving class. And there's not a job in the world that doesn't require some degree of creative problem solving. Fear of failure has been identified from research as the biggest barrier to coming up with creative solutions that add value to problems. Most people have experienced either a moment of creative suppression or even creative mortification where you thought you were doing something. It might have been musical, it might have been solving a math problem, it might have been developing a new recipe, and someone has just dinged you. They've just come down on you and said, what on earth are you doing? That is not a good idea. And those moments build up over time until we really start to fear failure. One study found actually that people would rather have a root canal without any kind of anesthetic than actually fail publicly. So fear of failure is a real deal. Unfortunately, with it being the biggest barrier to creativity, this is an issue for us as individual humans, but also for society as a whole. So what do I mean when I say creativity? Well, creativity is not just about doing new things. Creativity is about doing new things that add value. And to come up with novel solutions that add value, you really need some degree of creativity, which means you've got to overcome your fear of failure. All organizations need this type of creativity. There are numerous studies that show that organizations that are more creative are more profitable, they're more agile, they grow quicker, they have greater market share, they're more efficient, they're more cost effective. If you think about the fact that This is an estimate from a consulting company, but roughly 50% of any revenue that any organization is making today will have to come from new sources in 5 years' time. So that's the pace of change, and you cannot rely on even just staying stable without creativity, right? Even just to stay stable, you need to be having creative solutions. A couple of different studies have rated creativity as the #1 leadership competency. This is true not only in the private sector, so in for-profit organizations, but also in the public sector. Generally speaking, economies need creativity as well. So in order to have sustainable growth, sustainable economic growth, you have to be coming up with novel solutions that add value. You can't just keep printing money and pumping it into the economy. We did that, when we had COVID, and it's a short-term solution. But long-term, the way economies grow is through creativity. And finally, if that hasn't convinced you at all, then individuals who are better creative problem solvers tend to be happier. Research shows they tend to have better relationships. They are more confident. They perform better both on standardized tests and creative problem solving tests. And I didn't put this on the slide, but there's also studies that show that they have more sex. So creative problem solving is a critical skill, and fear of failure is the biggest barrier to it. So what are we going to do about that? Anytime you see this little red paper sort of icon in the top right-hand corner, that's referring to an activity in the packet, which if you didn't receive it ahead of time, you can absolutely email Heather or anyone on the team, and I'm sure they'll send it you. But the first thing to do to get over your fear of failure is to understand what your fear of failure is. The first thing that I have you do is to take this test. It's called the PFI, the Performance Failure Appraisal Inventory. It basically measures your individual level of fear of failure. This is a very well cited test. It's not like one of your pop things that you're going to see on Instagram or TikTok. This is a academically validated test and has been shown to predict a huge variety of behaviors, from sports to academic performance to earnings. When you take the test, there's an overall scale that you'll get. So you'll get an overall number that indicates your degree of fear of failing. But what's really important are the subscales. And there's 5 subscales. And what research shows is that not everybody fears failing in quite the same way. And so some people really fear upsetting others, and that's what they need to work on in order to overcome their fear of failure. Whereas for other people, it's about the personal shame and embarrassment, for example. So when you complete the inventory, there's the document that was sent to you has a grading criteria, so you can grade yourself, and then there's also some resources to help you understand your score. One thing that I recommend to my students when we do this together in person is to do it now, and then maybe come back to it in a year's time when you've practice some of these other exercises and things that we're going to be doing today, and take it again and see if your score has changed. And hopefully your fear of failure is decreasing over time. Another thing you can do is think about, is to take the inventory thinking about your personal life, and then take the inventory thinking about your professional life. And if you see differences, so if you find that you don't fear failure in your personal life, but you do in your professional life, or your scores on the subscales are different when you're thinking about those 2 different domains, you can start to identify ways that you might overcome your fear of failure from the domain where you don't fear it as much, and think about how you might translate those learnings into the domain where you do fear failure. Okay. If we were running this as a workshop, we would normally spend a lot of time now going through the scales and then discussing them and helping you understand your results. But I am going to skip on to the next letter in the failure acronym, which is A for admitting failure. You can't overcome your fear of failure until you actually admit that you have experienced failure. I'm sure you all know somebody like my 17-year-old son who cannot ever admit any failure whatsoever. And it's very hard to help him learn and get better at things because he refuses to admit that he's ever actually made any kind of a mistake. So let's think about admitting failure. Admitting failure is difficult, right? It is painful to admit failure, but it is the first step to becoming a better creative problem solver and to overcoming your fear of failure. It's actually becoming quite trendy. So these are just a few popular figures who have talked very openly, public figures who talk very openly about the failures that they experienced. And I think this is really important because it's very easy to look at someone like Viola Davis or J.K. Rowling and just think, oh my God, they're a phenomenal actress or author, and forget about all of the failures that they had along the way. One thing that, one visual I like to put in people's mind is that the path doesn't go failure or success. The path goes failure, 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 and then eventually to success. Some of the other examples on here, Procter & Gamble, when I worked for Unilever, P&G are our biggest competitor, but P&G have right in their lobby, when you walk into their main headquarters in Cincinnati, a wall of failures. And they have all of their product launches that did not succeed, that they launched to great fanfare, that they spent loads of money on developing and marketing, and ended up pulling because they did not succeed in the marketplace. P&G say they do this just to remind everybody that comes in that it's okay to take risks, that failures are a part of overall success. Similarly, the last little figure is from Bessemer Venture Partners. Bessemer Venture Partners are one of the single most successful capital venture firms out there. And they actually produce not just a report of their financial successes each year, but they keep a running tally on their website of all of their failures. So what does it mean to be a failure from a venture capitalist point of view? It means you were offered an opportunity to invest in a company like Etsy, like eBay, like PayPal. I'm trying to think of some of the others. And you said, I don't think it's going to work out, and turn them down. And so again, they keep a public record of these failures just to remind themselves that failure is part of the process. Today, like I said, admitting failure is becoming more and more common. There are dozens and dozens of books that you can find on learning how to fail better. There are even more podcasts. If you go and look on wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, you will see hundreds of podcasts now. The circled ones that I've put on here are some of the ones that I recommend. They're actually some of the better failure podcasts where they actually help you learn from the failure experiences rather than just wallowing in self-pity, which is not something we're learning to do today. There is a failure museum. This is in Sweden, although it has toured in the US. They went to see it when it came to DC, where they feature all kinds of products and services that failed. You can even attend fail festivals these days, variously called things like FailCon or Fail Forward or a Fail Fair. These fail festivals are becoming increasingly common as a way for innovators and entrepreneurs to stand up and say, instead of, look how great I am, this is my success, but to come forward and say, these are all the mistakes that I made. I don't know about you, but I learn a lot more from listening to people's mistakes and what they did wrong than I do from learning about their perfect journey to what they did right. There's actually an International Day for Failure where people are encouraged to go out and celebrate failures that they've had and share them. one of my favorite things, and I'm not going to say the title because it's a swear word, but this group, this F Up group, emerged as a kind of anti-TED Talk. So I don't know if you've ever seen a TED Talk. TED Talks are fabulous, and I use them in my classes, but TED Talks are all about celebrating everything that went right, and the person is just applauded for their amazing success. These nights are very similar to TED Talks, but people are talking about all the ways in which they failed and what they learned from those failures. If there's not a local one near you, they do ones via Zoom that you can join and learn from. But it's not just celebrities that are sharing their failures. We see it increasingly just amongst our friends. I don't know if you follow any of these sort of Pinterest type fail things, but it's very easy, particularly with social media, to see, these perfect meals being made or these perfect baby photos being taken and feel inadequate and that you're not living up to some expectation that society has put out there. And to counter that, a trend has started happening on social media. They call it Pinterest fails, but it can be a fail on any social media where you show what you were going for and then you show what your version turned out like. And 9 times out of 10, they don't look anything like what you're initially going for. I think the popularity of these types of sharing these types of fails shows that we have an innate human need to see that it's not just us and to share these experiences. There's even whole TV shows on it now, like Netflix has Nailed It, which is still going on. So exercise time. Actually, I will skip ahead here. The exercise is to write your own failure resume. So this emerged, and that's what the previous 2 slides were talking about, but it emerged from originally from an article in Nature with this very well-renowned scientist who's had lots of successful publications, was just fed up with people always, thinking that she had it easy and she had, all this great work going on in academia. We live and die by our publications. And she just wrote, it's just not a true record, right? Of if I listed all of the grants that I got turned down from, the positions that I got rejected from, the meetings where I got, dismissed from, that would be a better reflection. All of the studies that she's done that are just, failed to work out and are sitting in, her office drawer. And so she sort of started this idea of talking about not just your successes, which you do in a resume, but talking about your failures. So the next exercise that I encourage you to do is to actually write your own failure resume. And in this resume, you list on the left-hand side, and again, this is in the packet for you to practice if you want to, an event that happened. And we use this language very deliberately because failure is not a person. Failure is an event, right? So an event, it's something that happened. How you respond to it is entirely within your control. So you can't change the event that happened, but you can choose how you respond to it. So this is my failure resume. Some of you may be thinking, oh my goodness, she went to Wharton and got a PhD from, one of the top business schools in the world. And she's got it so lucky. These are just some of the failures that I've had along the way. What's really important with this exercise, however, so you don't just get depressed, is to then alongside each event, put what you learned from it. Think about what lessons that you learned from that. And you can do this in any domains of your life. So you can do it in your personal life, in your work life, in your parenting life. I always tell my students, if I ignore you when I see you in the supermarket outside of the classroom, it's because I'm probably about to yell at one of my children and I don't want you to see me fail. So those are the types of failures that I have listed. Later on, we'll think about a concept called return on failure. So if you're thinking of doing an MBA, you've probably heard of the term return on investment. Return on failure is exactly the same calculation, but you try to put a numerical value on the failure experience. And in one of those instances, I think I've got it up there, we bought a house that we ended up selling at a huge loss. It just wasn't for us, for our family, the lifestyle that we wanted. Nothing was in walking distance. It was on top of a massive hill that I wouldn't drive down when it snowed. So even though we had a huge loss, that was the cost of the failure. The value that we learned about what is really important for us in choosing a house has actually been priceless. Okay, so let's move on to the next letter, which is intelligent failure. So normally at this point in the workshop, some people are saying, yeah, I get it, but not all failure is equal. Well, I agree, not all failure is equal. If you are failing because of simple laziness or carelessness, then that's not what we call intelligent failure. And so for the rest of this workshop, what we're going to be thinking about is how do you actually engage in intelligent failure? Because behind every successful innovation that you have ever seen, think of any big company you like, Apple, Nike, and all of the successes they've had. Behind all of those successes is a litany of failures. But they are intelligent failures. They are ones that have been made deliberately, and they've closed them down when they've realized that they're not working. Jeff Bezos is one of the people who I find particularly admirable for overcoming fear of failure. He goes into any project giving it a 30% chance that it will succeed. So he goes in expecting it to fail. He's had huge failures. The Fire Phone, I don't know if you remember when that was launched. It was launched at $200. Within months, it had been reduced to $1. A huge, very, very public failure, but it's helped lead to the development of other goods and services that Amazon provides. One of their most famous ones is they started a liquidation auctions thing to try and compete with eBay. That failed. They started something called Z-Shop, which was try and compete with Etsy. That failed. But they turned all of the learnings from those two experiences into what's now called Amazon Marketplace. And about 70% of sales that come from Amazon, the retail side of Amazon, not their the other side of their business where they do data services, but from the retail side of things now come from independent sellers on this marketplace. So they've turned it around. They've learned from these. So these were intelligent failures. So what is the difference between an intelligent failure and a stupid one, right? Or a preventable one? This is drawing on work from Amy Edmondson, who's a management professor, and I've adapted it slightly for this course. But basically, preventable failures are ones where you're either trying to fail deliberately, right? Amy calls this deviance. So you are engaging in a behavior to deliberately make the organization or whatever you're engaging in fail. Two more common ones, right, which are a lack of attention. If you are failing because you're just not taking the time to really sit down and read the report that you've written or double check the spelling, then that's not an intelligent failure. That's a preventable failure. And there are things that you can do to improve that. As you move up to the other end, there's things called what she calls intelligent failures involve doing things like hypothesis testing or exploratory testing. And this is conducting little experiments. And we're going to think about those more as we move through the rest of the letters in the acronym. Where most failures occur, so you've got companies like Amazon doing the good, intelligent failure. You've got a lot of preventable failure that you really don't want to be happening. A lot of failure is happening in this passively disengaged zone. And these are failures that are certainly preventable after you've had some learning. So maybe you assume somebody has the skill to do a particular task. So I might assume that my graduate assistant has the skill to grade papers for an undergraduate class. The first time they do, it's a total disaster. So I have learned, okay, they actually don't have that ability, and I can provide training and improve the process along the way. So for future graduate students, I know, okay, this is what I need to do so that they can adequately grade the undergraduate papers. And so those are the types of things that you want to be looking for and seeing where does the failure that you're engaging in fall along these different lines. I have a specific task that that I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip over this. But these are some things that really make a failure intelligent. I think the one surprising one that comes from this is that they are deliberate, right? So that's going back to Amy's point. Where you're doing some kind of experimentation, where you're actually trying to fail, you're seeking to fail. And if you don't, that's great. But if you do, where you've learned something and you keep moving forward. They also have to be big enough. The failure has to be big enough to be consequential. If you're Amazon and each of your failures only costing the company $1 or $2, that's not really an intelligent failure, because it's such a teeny amount of money relative to the resources the company has. So how do you go about failing intelligently? Well, this is my summary of multiple different pieces of research, and it's kind of a cycle that you go through. So to admit this person. So first of all, you have an attempt to innovate. And the first issue that can happen where you might not fail intelligently is you don't actually recognize that a failure's occurred. And you may think, how is that even possible? But it's if you have ever bought something from Amazon and it's missing, a piece of, or IKEA, you've go to build a piece of furniture and it's missing, 2 key screws that you need or something. That means somewhere along the way, when that piece of furniture was being assembled, there was a failure to recognize in the process that the screws were missing. And so you end up with a dissatisfied consumer at the end of it. This is something that Toyota takes very, very seriously, and the way they build their manufacturing systems is very clever in that something can't move further down the line if it hasn't passed all of the tests up front. So failure stops the entire production line. So you couldn't have a situation where the door is missing 2 screws and you end up, with the car on the showroom and then driving off the showroom and the door falls off because it's missing 2 screws. Because the second it is detected along the production line, all production stops until it's corrected. So you need to have systems in place to help you recognize when failure has occurred. The next step to failing intelligently after you've detected a failure is making sure you have a supportive response to the failure. Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, this just isn't true. When a failure is detected, your boss has a very dysfunctional reaction. And in extreme cases, like with Apple Maps, I don't know if any of you remember when Apple Maps first came out, but it was a total disaster. They removed Google Maps from their operating system. They implemented their own one, but it wasn't anywhere near as good as Google Maps. England was just like, there were no individual roads on England anywhere. It was just one big blob. They had, roads going up into the air. It was a total mess. And Apple actually responded very dysfunctionally, and they fired the entire Maps team. Now, that is sending the wrong message. Instead, what you need to do is say, okay, this happened. Let's analyze it and understand it. So that's the next step to failing intelligently. After you have analyzed the failure, you need to make sure that that learning is shared. The CIA actually has a shared database of all projects and projects that didn't work out in the way they were supposed to, so that people can go in and look at that database and access information and learn from it. So you need to make sure that that learning is shared, that it's not just isolated in your 1-2 person team or your department, but that everybody has access, ability to learn from it. And then finally, you need to apply that learning, right? So what does that mean? It means you need to have a new process involved, or you need to have more training at step 3, or whatever it might be. And that is how you go through this cycle to help you learn how to fail intelligently. What I assign you to do in for this particular one is to actually do another quiz. And this is, again, an academically validated, very robust quiz, but it asks you to think about the error management culture that you exist in and the error aversion culture you exist in. Now, most of you as incoming MBAs are going to be thinking about this from a professional environment, so your work environment. But what this scale does is help you identify in that circle, where is your organization or your group failing, right? Where are you not failing intelligently? It will help you see, is it at the stage where failures are detected? Or maybe you've got that and you are detecting failures, but they're being handled in an unhelpful manner. And so when you take this quiz, it will just help you pinpoint where in that circle of intelligent failure you might not be performing up to scratch, and therefore identify some steps that you can do to improve. Okay, I'm conscious of time and we're only on the L. So learning failure is my favorite one. When I teach this as a day-long workshop, this is lunchtime. And I send my students out with a lunchtime task to complete. And that is to practice failure. So if anyone here does any kind of weightlifting, Dylan, or has done CrossFit before. I used to do CrossFit. And what I found fascinating when I did CrossFit, when they teach you how to back squat, they don't give you 50 pounds and say, okay, put it on your shoulders and squat down and off you go. They give you a plastic white pole and they make you practice with that white pole. So it's just, a very light white bar, hundreds and hundreds of times, squatting down and getting back up. But more than that, they make you practice failing. So they make you practice squatting down and then pretending you can't get back up again, so you failed, and releasing the bar behind you. Why? Because it is human, the instinctive response when you are in a squat and you have something on heavy is to lean forward. When you feel like you can't stand up again, your instinct, your human instinct is to lean forward. If you have 100 pounds across your neck, that is the worst thing that you can do. So you have to train yourself to fail properly. And failure, in this case, not being able to stand up from a squat, is dropping the bar behind you. You practice it multiple times in a safe environment so that if it ever happens to you with real weight on your back, you actually know how to handle it. So you're trying to educate your failure muscles. I'm going to skip over this story and tell you what I asked the students to do. So this exercise is shamelessly stolen from Jia Jiang's book, Rejection Proof. And he calls it rejection therapy. He basically, and this is what his book is about, found himself, I don't know, he was in his late 20s thinking his life was okay, but what if he'd said yes to all these opportunities that he'd been too afraid to try? And so he just started challenging himself to get rejected. And he started asking for things that he never would have normally asked for because he was too afraid of failing. He was too afraid of being told no or of being, in his language, rejected. And so what my students, and depending on what class it is in the workshop, we do it, you have to get rejected 3 times over lunch. And we brainstorm some ways that you might do this. So you have to go to McDonald's and ask if you can have 2 free Cokes, or you have to ask the person in front of the line at you at the post office if they will pay for your stamps. Just lots of things that normally you'd be too afraid to do. But practicing them, right? Getting used to hearing no, which is evidence that you failed, starts to numb the pain of it. And after you've done it enough times, after you've practiced failing enough times, this fear of it, this fear of being rejected, this fear of looking stupid starts to disappear. Another way you can do it is to challenge yourself. So I do it this way some semesters, to violate small social norms. So stand facing people in an elevator instead of standing with your back to them. They're just very, very small things, but they can get your heart racing. But as you practice doing them more and more, these breakings of social norms are like little failures. You are working your failure muscle and you're starting to overcome your fear of failure. So there's some examples listed of things you can do. Jia Jiang did it for 100 days. I've had students have to fail every day for the entire course of a semester and video record it and upload it or document it in a journal. Sometimes we just do it for 1 week, but maybe challenge yourself for 1 week to get rejected, right? To be told no every day. The only word of warning I give is don't ask for something where you wouldn't be happy if the answer was yes, because surprise, a lot of the times people do actually say yes. And so ask for that credit card rate reduction or that pay raise or whatever it is that you've been fearing doing. You've been fearing failure, and you never know, you might get the answer you wanted. However, then you have failed at rejection therapy, so you need to try again to be told no. Okay, we are over halfway there, so I will go through the last 3 a little more quickly. This next one is about understanding failure, and most importantly, trying to understand failure before it actually happens. It might help to know that most new projects fail, right? And that might be depressing to some people, but it might also be reassuring to some people. 70% of enterprise change initiatives fail. This is all from academic and industry research. CPG is consumer packaged goods. 80% of new consumer packaged goods, so that new toothpaste, that new flavor of chocolate, 80% of CPG launches fail. If you remember back to the beginning when I was saying 50% of your revenues got to come from new sources every 5 years, this is why, because a lot of the activities that you're doing are just destined to fail. 90% of startups fail, 10% of them in their first year. Within government, the numbers are awful. And when I teach this to the CIA, there's always lots of nods of agreement here, but 94% of government IT projects fail. And by fail, I mean they either go over budget or over time. So they might get technically completed, but certainly not within budget or on time. So what are the main reasons why failure happens? Well, the biggest problem is a lack of preparation. And so the next exercise is to help you prepare better and to anticipate what prospective failures might be. The biggest reasons are to do with project leader overconfidence, right? You go into a project not like Jeff Bezos expecting it to fail, but expecting it to succeed. If you go into a project with a different expectation, it forces you to analyze and think through what are all the potential ways this could fail, and identify assumptions that you might be making that might not be true, that could cause the launch or a project to fail. So how do you get better at this? Well, you use something called prospective hindsight. And I'm not going to go in this in detail, but basically what you do is conduct what's called a pre-mortem. Now, probably if you've been in business a little bit, you've probably heard of a post-mortem. So this is where a project has gone wrong, a project has failed, and you've sat down as a team and you've said, okay, what happened? A pre-mortem is basically trying to replicate that process, but at the beginning of a project. And the most important thing, which is where the previous research comes in, this prospective hindsight, is to not ask why might we fail, but to ask why did we fail. So you have to imagine that this has actually happened. And if you can get into that state and bring your team together, and really think about this failure did happen, why did it happen before it's happened, then you can generate very, very specific and a great quantity of reasons, which will help you, prevent them from actually occurring. Where are we? Time. Click. Okay, so that was you understanding failure ahead of time. Perhaps one of the most important things that I can teach you is thinking about how to reframe failure. Failure is going to happen. Hopefully you've learned some techniques, however briefly today, that make you help you overcome your fear of failure, and to perform intelligent failure or prevent unintelligent failure from happening. But failure is still going to happen. And so when it does, how do you deal with it? And this is what I use for the R for, which is about reframing what failure is. One of my favorite studies is this one. So this is an old psych study. It's about 40 years old now. But it examined gold medalists. And so what these psychologists did was they took photos of bronze, silver, and gold medalists from various Olympic events. They took them from the summer and winter events, and any event that you can think of. And what they did was they just they cropped out the face of the winner. And then they showed these faces to undergraduate students and said, rate how happy you think this person is. The undergraduate students had no idea, these were photos of athletes who'd been on podiums. They just saw faces of people and were asked to rate how much did they look like they were smiling, like how happy did they look. They couldn't see that they'd won any kind of medal. It was just a close crop of their face. And then they analyzed the results. And the results were super interesting. So as you might expect, the gold medalists were rated as seeming the happiest. Objectively, they did better than everybody else. And subjectively, students thought they looked happier than everybody else. The interesting result came from the bronze to the silver medalists. And normally I would throw this out there for a class discussion. Seeing as this is a webinar, I won't. The bronze medalists were rated as the next happiest group. And so they appeared to be happier than the silver medalists. So why is this? Well, it's because we engage in something called counterfactual thinking. So when an event happens, we can imagine better or worse alternative outcomes. In the gold medal winner's case, there are no better alternative outcomes, right? You won the gold. In the bronze medal winner's case, the alternative outcome, the most likely alternative outcome, is that you didn't make it to the platform. And so it is a worse alternative outcome that you're imagining. When that counterfactual is worse, it makes you feel happier with the current situation. The silver medalists, on the other hand, they were imagining a better alternative outcome. If only I had run 5 seconds faster, or swam like 5 seconds faster, or jumped, 1 meter higher, I would have gotten the gold instead of the silver. So they were imagining better alternative outcomes. When the counterfactuals, when the alternative outcomes you imagine are better than the ones that actually occurred, you end up being all of these negative emotions, feeling all of these negative emotions that you listed at the beginning that failure makes you feel, right? Feeling disappointed and sad and annoyed and upset. What does this tell us? Well, objectively, the silver medalists did better than the bronze medalists. Subjectively, the bronze medalists are happier with their situation than the silver medalists. This just shows that events happen, and how you respond to them will completely determine how you feel about them. You may be familiar with Carol Dweck's work on mindset, but she has dedicated her life to looking at this way that people respond to events. And so an event that might have been a failure is just an event. How you choose to respond to it, how you choose to frame that event in your head, whether you think of better alternative outcomes or worse alternative outcomes, is entirely up to you. And the difference is between what's called a growth or a fixed mindset. And people who have a fixed mindset are generally concerned with trying to prove that they are better. And if they can't prove that, then they feel very disappointed. So they're less likely to engage in activities where they don't think they can prove that they're going to be better. People with a growth mindset, on the other hand, are mainly concerned with improvement. So those two letters, IM, before proving, become absolutely critical. Instead of just trying to prove all the time, what you really care about is improving. And so maybe you try something new and don't succeed at it, but you're still happy because you tried something new and you've learned something about how you can get better and try again next time. So this, one of the best ways of actually putting this into practice is to think about a project as a little mini experiment. And we don't have a lot of time left, but in this particular exercise, I ask you to go back to, elementary school and think about the scientific method, but frame your project in this way. So instead of going in assuming that the project is automatically going to succeed, go in and frame the project that you have, thinking about it as a little experiment. And you are just trying to learn something, right? And you have a hypothesis that if you do X, Y will occur, right? If you run this speed, you will win the gold medal. And you're going to test it with an experiment. You're going to analyze the data. Maybe your hypothesis was confirmed, maybe it wasn't. And then you go back, and this is the scientific process, is that you reformulate your hypothesis and keep going. If you frame the problems that you're going in as little mini hypotheses that are to be tested with experiments, you're much more likely to succeed. The important thing here is to design experiments where you can fail cheaply and fail quickly. So you may have heard this language of failing cheaply, failing quickly from entrepreneurship. And what I have my students do here, and this is what the worksheet is about, is designing an experiment to test a hypothesis you have about a project you're engaging in a way where you can test it within one day for less than $100. Doritos Los Tacos were one of the most successful fast food product launches in the history of fast food. But when the food designers first had this idea and they took it to the board said, there's no way in hell we're covering our tacos with orange dust, and people will hate it, and they'll get their fingers all, covered in orange, and it'll change the taste of the meat, and no. And point blank refused to do it. So what did the designers do? They went to Home Depot and bought a paint can, a spray paint can. They filled it with water. They put a bunch of Doritos orange dust in it, and they spray painted a bunch of regular hard tacos. They then tested those tacos with consumers to see what their responses were. This is a mini experiment. They had a hypothesis that people would like, orange cheese flavored tacos better than just regular hard tacos, and managed to show it with a very cheap experiment. Okay, the last one is embracing failure. Why are you not working? And in this one, we really think about how can you go about building brave spaces. Note that I say brave spaces, not safe spaces. Safe spaces have become a bit of a trendy term these days, and it's a lot easier for some people to feel safe in a space than it is for others. If you're a white middle-aged male, it's a lot easier for you to feel safe because you're probably in an environment with other similar guys. You've been brought up in a supportive structure. For other people, that's not as easy to do. So rather than talking about safe spaces, I like to talk about brave spaces. And how can you build a space where you're giving people the psychological freedom to experiment. And we talk about some examples. One of my favorite ones is from Pixar. And the way they do this is they have what's called the dailies. And the dailies, at the end of every day, the whole team comes together who's working on a particular movie production, and they share what they worked on that day. And it doesn't matter how rough it is, how scrappy and unfinished, and everybody from the most senior producer on the team to the intern shares what they've been working on that day and gets feedback. And they dedicate an hour to this each day. And the benefit of it is, first of all, you very quickly overcome your fear of failure, right? Because you're showing rough work really early on. But so is the senior leadership team, right? So you're seeing, and everyone's commenting on everybody's work. But you identify, remember we talked about identifying failures early on as part of intelligent failure? You identify those potential issues early on and can start taking corrective action before it's too late. Okay, these are just some other things that businesses, schools have actually tried. One university actually with their undergraduate students offers a certificate of failure, and it's a course that all their first year undergraduate students have to go through. It's a very what's the word? Like the students that go to this university have typically only ever achieved A's in their life and have never experienced any failure. And then when they suddenly walk into this university and take their first, engineering class and get a D in it, they don't know how to cope. And so that's why they introduced this certificate of failure, a first year course on thinking through some of the similar topics that we've been talking about today. So with that, I would just like to say congratulations. You've had your first taste on how to get better at failing. And the slides are available as well for you to look at, as well as all of the handouts. And feel free to reach out to me directly or any member of the admissions team if you have questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jane. Really appreciate that. Was really great. Yeah, so for those of you who attended, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We will follow up with sending the presentation and a recording of this for like Pat, if you want to look at the beginning of it so you can catch up. Do we want to ask, does anyone have any questions before we go? No? Okay, thank you so much, everyone. With that, we're going to conclude our webinar, and we thank you so much for attending.